All right, so I haven't done this YouTube thing or this podcasting thing solo. So this is my first I'm going to film this by myself and see how it goes. But I wanted to jump into these two subjects because it's been all over the conversation of the internet. And I'm from South Louisiana. I feel like I can give you some perspective that maybe you don't have on the new Pope and the plantation burning in South Louisiana. Let's get into it. All right, so there's been a lot of conversation about the new Pope, Pope Leo, and his racial identity and his roots to Louisiana and New Orleans. And so I am from South Louisiana and want to give you some context that I'm sure many people in the country may not have heard of. And so I'm going to give you the introduction to some words that are unique probably to people here that most people in the rest of the country have not heard. So Pope Leo, the new Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, has been praised. He is from Chicago, Illinois, and he is the first American Pope. Many people have been discussing the fact that he may be the first Black Pope. Now, there's some history that says that there have been other people throughout history that potentially were Black. I'm not going to get into the nuance of that. I don't know. But what I do know is that this man had a grandmother who was biracial from South Louisiana. Creole is what people from South Louisiana identified them as. And there was a phrase or a word that was used to define Black people who were biracial at the time. It was mulatto. It was a derogatory term, but it was used widespread to be very clear about who these biracial people were. If you were Black, you had a baby with somebody who was white, that baby was a mulatto. That child. Now, you may not have heard of the one drop rule, but I want to give you the context to understanding how deep the racial issues or the racial qualifications of Black people went throughout the history of America. So to break this down very clearly, a biracial person is someone who is considered mulatto in those times. But because of the one drop rule, they created words that define Blackness down to 1/8. So a mulatto is a biracial person. If that biracial person marries or has a relationship with a white person and then has a child, that child was considered a quadroon. They were 25% Black. Okay? If the quadroon grows up, lives their life, and marries or has a relationship with a white person, and they have a baby, that baby is considered an octoroon. That baby is considered 1/8 Black. And there was a word in Merriam-Webster to define biracial. If a biracial person married a white person or had a relationship with a white person and had a baby, then they were a quadroon, that child. And if that quadroon had a relationship with someone that was white and had a baby, that baby was considered an octoroon, and you would end up with a Pope Leo. An octoroon whose roots go deep in South Louisiana. And so those words were used to quantify how Black a person was in America because race is a construct. It is something that has been used to qualify and put people into boxes. And so much so that his family left South Louisiana, went to Chicago, Illinois, and did what we call as passé blanc in South Louisiana. They wouldn't pass for white. Because would it have been possible for Leo to end up where he is if he had functioned in the world as a Black man or a biracial man all of his life through his roles? And with the attacks on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's clear to understand that if a society was willing to label Black people down to 1/8 of a Black person, that same society doesn't just undo all of those things overnight. Let me give you more context. Plessy v. Ferguson was a Supreme Court decision that was made in the 1800s about a case where a Black man was attempting to sit at the front of a train. He was denied the ability to sit at the front of the train because he was Black, and hence came a Supreme Court ruling that gave us separate but equal, meaning that you could have separate accommodations for somebody if they were Black, but they had to be equal. Here is the catch that I'm sure most of you do not know. Plessy was a quadroon. In his case where he was fighting for the ability to sit in this seat, he was not fighting because he felt he was Black. He was fighting because he felt that he had such a small percentage of blackness in him that it should not matter. Matter of fact, he said that his blackness was undiscernible. That was in the proceedings. He wasn't even trying to be black. He was saying, I am not black, but somebody knew that his grandmama or great-grandmama was a black woman. And as a result, he could not sit in the seat on that first-class seat that he purchased on that train, even though he could pass for white. And so the attacks on race have always existed in America. There's always been a place to caveat and say that black people, for whatever reason, are unqualified for the position, the seat, the accommodation, the whatever, that your blackness was the reason that you were undo whatever you felt you would do. And that is the reality of where we are even today, that there is an attempt to remove diversity, equity, inclusion, or the advancement of people that are black and people of color, because there are people who feel like their advancement diminishes the other person's advancement or white society's advancement, which we know is not true. We know these things are not true, but yet these things exist within the construct of this country, and we try to pretend that it doesn't exist. But if words like mulatto, quadroon, and octoroon exist, why did they exist? To qualify us or to disqualify us at every turn they could. Louisiana's been back in the news because of the plantation burning, Nottoway. And so I did some digging on Nottoway. And for historical context, to be clear, I am probably 6-7 generations Louisiana. My grandmother is from Rosedale. She's actually buried in Rosedale, which is in Iberville Parish, which is not far from White Castle. I live about 40 minutes away from Nottoway Plantation. And there's been a lot of conversation and a lot of chatter about this plantation burning and the fact that black people have rejoiced. I saw these sisters pouring out some wine in front of Nottoway as it burned. And I want to be very clear that images like Nottoway are not a thing of excitement for black people, because it's very clear to us that the suffering of our people took place in the fields of these plantations. That to say that the owner, the Randolphs who owned Nottoway Plantation in its inception were not brutal slave masters, that they were good people who were fair to those that were enslaved there, you can't be fair to somebody that is kept against their will. Full stop. That's number one. Number two, that we have always been qualified or quantified in a way that made us less than, but we built the plantation. We built a house that lasted 150 years, and you don't know the name of a single enslaved person on that plantation. But we're talking about the Randolphs, lazy white men who worked black people that were enslaved. Let's be very clear. A lazy white rapist is not somebody that we should aspire to be like. These are not people that we should have portraits of. They named the trees on the plantation, but they couldn't tell you the names of the 170 plus people that were enslaved there. The 170 plus carpenters, brick masons, engineers, and people of skill who built one of the finest homes to exist in America, whose names were never etched on its walls. So most black people don't give a damn that Nottoway burned down, because the focus is always on the wrong people that were on the plantation. The focus is always on making these lazy white men. And let's be very clear. If you owned other people and you worked them for free to advance yourself, you were a lazy pig.
I used to be a tour guide at Nottoway Plantation. Nottoway was not talking about history properly. They regularly threatened my job because I was, quote, too emotional about the historical context and slavery there. I was there from 2017 till 2020 when COVID hit. The amount of ridiculous nonsense that I had to talk about on that tour was overwhelming. Dutch people, when they came in, because there were thousands of people from all around the world that would come in, the Dutch people knew more about the history of the transatlantic slave trade than the majority of people that worked at the plantation. I'm glad it burned down. Make no mistake. The type of history that they were teaching there was a bunch of just headline stuff. It was a bunch of buzzword stuff. I mean, honestly. I'm in Facebook groups and looking at people's posts about it being burned down, and the only thing they're talking about is, this architecture. Oh, did you know that they would hide jewelry in the bedpost? Oh, did you know that these curtains were reproductions of the ones from Gone with the Wind? And the way that the script for the tour was written was framing John Randolph as a slave owner who wasn't that bad. He was nice, blah, blah, blah. And I absolutely refused to talk about that. I went against the grain. I even upset somebody to the point where they told me that calling him a shyster was racist. Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, he was a shrewd and calculating businessman who put profit above all else, including his own family. And he was a coward who ran away to Texas whenever the war started. There's all this mythology about how, the lady of the house went out one time, and the reason why the house was saved is because she had a knife under her skirt and she was ready to kill those people, blah, blah, blah. She went ahead and said that they could stay there as long as they kept it up. There's zero proof or evidence of any of that. There are tons of paintings all around the house where they're like, this was the family, this was the family, this was the daughter, this was that. And like, none of it is true. None of it is true. I remember whenever the news stations from all around the country were calling plantations and asking them to make a comment on the Knot, that wedding magazine, removing plantation weddings from their advertisements. And I couldn't give any sort of statement, but I went off record and went off. So yeah, I'm glad Nottoway's gone. Nobody who's actually owned it really cared for the actual real history of stuff out there. And they really just wanted to be able to continue charging people $50,000 plus for weddings there. Which also, shame on you if you think that that's a good place to have a wedding. You're an idiot. And no, the house itself was not haunted, but the grounds were absolutely cursed.
You were somebody who took advantage of other people in a very inhumane and brutal way. And then the audacity that a judge and her husband from Louisiana own this place and pretend that this is okay. They've shared this like it's a resort, some desirable place. Now, I know black people who've even gone and gotten married there, okay? Because there's some of us who have like this weird, love relationship or fantasy about Southern weddings and things of that nature. And I get it. I understand that there's a beauty to the South. But ain't nothing beautiful about a plantation if we're not telling the truth. Ain't nothing beautiful about a place that was harboring that harbored and captured humans, treated them inhumanely, often raped the women and some of the men, brutally beat them, kept them against their will, worked them without paying them, and gave them the scraps of the food that remained. And you think that we think that the white folks who own the place and turned it into a resort, name the trees, but don't tell the truth about its history are good white people. What I hope we as black people are able to see is what we built. That people who often couldn't read or write built structures that lasted 150 years. And that we have idolized the wrong people in many periods of our society. That they made us think that we were the lazy ones, right? That we were the unintelligent ones. But the reality is the lazy one was the one working free labor. That was the lazy one. The one that lacked intelligence was probably the one who couldn't build a mansion himself. Probably the one who the only way he could get something built for himself was to brutally use other people. Our people built structures. We built the White House. We built these plantations. And let's be clear that a 50,000 square foot plantation is no small task to build. And you can't be stupid and do it. And with everything that they have used to work against us, to make us not see ourselves as builders, to make us see ourselves as slaves, to a system that has never been supportive of us. What I hope you see is that this image that was built through brutality, that we get the ability to reimagine ourselves today and become the builders for tomorrow. That I hope that in us, that those of us, whether you are biracial, passé, blanc, that you can understand that the brutality that we experience exists in different ways today. That it's brutal to start stripping away people's jobs from them that they worked and went to college for. That it is brutal to change policies that took us 100 years to accomplish. That it is brutal to work methodically against people who have done you nothing. But the reality is they don't want you to know about images like that. That the ricochet that we see today, the reason that people like Pope Leo's family left South Louisiana was because there was a ricochet after that dark-skinned man in the middle became the lieutenant governor of Louisiana. And most of us don't even understand the history that free people of color, formerly enslaved people, became half of the Louisiana legislature in the 1800s, and that white America, much like Project 2025, did everything that they could to build Jim Crow or projects to ensure that black people could not get that much power again. And then they crafted narratives or rewrote history the same way that they want to take books out of school today, the same way that they want to diminish our history today, the same way that they want to roll back our accomplishments today, is because they don't want images like that. They don't want you to understand that real power, real economic and political power is a pathway for you to be able to transform communities, build institutions, and be able to have all that you desire for yourself and to own and control the structures of government that exist within your community. And when I say own and control, meaning the people who are in those communities, electing people who think like them, look like them, have the same beliefs as them, to control the mechanisms of government, means that the people own the power. And so I felt like I couldn't do this in a short form, so I wanted to really kind of dive in and break it down. I don't know if this is going to land on anybody, if it's going to make a lot of sense to you. But I hope that something within these two conversations where you understand the history that black people went through race, through the story of Pope Leo and Nottoway Plantation, becomes clear to you that, you know, there's always been a attempt to define or box black people in, and that we should always be trying to redefine, reimagine, have a renaissance of our own for ourselves, for our people, because ain't nobody coming to save us. As a matter of fact, they coming to ensure that they rewrite the narratives about us and make us all dumb, unintelligent, unqualified, and unable people, when the reality is we know that we are nothing like the things that they define us as, because when we couldn't read, we built the South, which was the prosperous South of America, while black people were building it, though we couldn't prosper from it. And so I hope that many of us are beginning to think differently about our position today, that the South can be ours, that we can have black folks and working class white people who think alike, build policy that gives us a more just and a more prosperous South, a society that doesn't have to pretend that things don't exist, but a society where we see the problem for what it is, we address the issue at the core so that we can build a future that is more just, more equitable, and more prosperous for all people, not just some. Yeah, I think that's it. So I'm gonna hop on here weekly and do some of these backyard conversations and just kind of get into the issues. I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the solutions. I don't even have all the thoughts some days. Some days I'm fried of being able to think about a pathway forward. But what I do know is that history teaches us what is possible, what has happened, and it gives us strategy to learn how to navigate in a way that is impactful for us, rather than a way that is just motion. I think sometimes we just moving, but we don't know what we're moving towards. And in my opinion, we should be moving towards political and economic power for black and working class people and people of color in this country, so that the power is not just within the hands of the wealthy, but the power is within the hands of the people, and the people can give themselves safer communities, more prosperous communities, healthier communities, vibrant communities where we can live, prosper, and be whole. So let's begin to build a dialogue back and forth so that our people understand that the context of how we got here matters for us to be able to strategically build ourselves a way out. And if people will define black people down to 1/8 black, race has always mattered in this country, and being black has always been a problem in this country. And if you understand that, then you can understand why the world has worked so hard against you and why it is so important for black people to work together. For black people to work together. If there's nothing else you take away from me today, it is that a people who will define you down to 1/8 black seek to divide you away from the rest. And if that is their desire, then you should be very intentional about coming together so that you can be as strong as possible against those who seek to divide you against each other. The more we get in critical mass with each other, like a state like Louisiana, that's 34% black. We were 50% black when we took up half of the legislature in this state. The state was 50% black and 50% of the legislature was black. And black people took over half of the statewide offices in the 1800s, fresh off the plantation, without college degrees, but they were laborers, they were builders, they were formerly enslaved people, they were entrepreneurs, they were free people of color. They were some badass black people, and they don't want you to know nothing about them. So you ought to go digging up their names and telling every black person you can about them, so that we can understand that we ain't come from no people who were beat down and didn't know a way forward. That we come from people that even when they beat us down and they took our children and they did everything to make us feel small and insignificant, that we built the South, that we built structures that lasted 150 years, that we had families that were so audacious that they moved to other places and then their children became popes. That's what you come from. And don't you ever forget it.